On the day she got married, the bride was barely 16 years old. Her name was Julia Agrippina, but she went by the cognomen Agrippinilla, or Little Agrippina. Her father had died when she was only 4, under circumstances whispered about, but never fully understood. Agrippinilla remembered little of him, a great general, a beloved statesman, a man so adored by the Roman people that his likeness adorned temples and forums across the empire. What few memories she did have were clouded by tales of heroic deeds and mythic devotion, blurring the man with the legend. Her mother, a woman who in pursuit of the honours owed to her children had defied an emperor, paid the ultimate price. First removed from the capital, then exiled to a remote island, she had vanished from Agrippinilla's life by imperial command. The girl could still recall that day, her grandmother Antonia's arms holding her back as soldiers escorted her mother out of their home. It was around that same time that Agrippinilla was formally betrothed. His name was Gnaeus Domitius Enobarbus. The arrangement had been made by her adoptive grandfather, Emperor Tiberius, though heavily influenced by her grandmother Antonia. Enobarbus, a man in his 20s, was the only son of Antonia's older sister, also named Antonia, making him Agrippinilla's cousin once removed. Along with her 2 younger sisters, Julia Drusilla and Julia Livilla, and her older brother Caligula, each of whom were also betrothed to families loyal to Tiberius, Agrippinilla moved into the domus of her great-grandmother, the Augusta. There the children were cared for until their great-grandmother's death, 2 years later. Afterward, they returned to the household of their grandmother, Antonia. But the death of the Augusta was a turning point. Not long after, Agrippinilla's eldest brother, Nero Caesar, was arrested for conspiracy and exiled to a small island. Her next brother, Drusus Caesar, was soon accused of moral indecency and imprisoned in a cell beneath the imperial residence on the Palatine. Then, when word arrived that Nero had died in exile, Tiberius summoned Agrippinilla's last brother, Caligula, to live with him on the island of Capri. Now she and her sisters were truly alone. No father, no mother, and no brothers. There was no one left to defend them. These 3 princesses of the imperial household, watched over only by a grandmother in her 70s and an uncle burdened by infirmity, were left to find their own way through the treacherous world of Rome's ruling class. And the way was treacherous. Agrippinilla had heard the rumours that the Praetorian prefect, Lucius Aelius Sejanus, had been the man behind the ruin of her family. After Sejanus's execution, all eyes turned to Tiberius, hoping now he would release Agrippinilla's mother from her exile on Pandateria and her brother Drusus from his imprisonment beneath the Palatine. But Tiberius did not release them. Both died, of starvation. Drusus, she was told, had been found on the ground, his mouth filled with dirty straw and stuffing from his mattress, which he had attempted to eat. Her mother, it was said, had stopped eating the moment she learned of his death. And all the while, her last brother, Caligula, remained a hostage on the island of Capri. How long would it be before Tiberius locked him in a cell and let him die of starvation as well? With no faith left to place in her grandfather, the emperor, Agrippinilla entered the atrium dressed in her wedding stola and saffron veil. Perhaps it would be in the household of her new husband that she would at last find safety. The soles of her sandals clicked softly against the paving stones, muffled by the press of woven fabric. The saffron veil obscured her view, but she could still make out the line of torches, the outlines of faceless watchers. The tweetling of flutes reached her ears, but it felt far away. The laughter of those in the streets, their songs, their crude verses, rose and fell like something from another world. Somewhere behind her, Drusilla and Livilla walked with garlands in their hair. But amidst the nuptial mirth, Agrippinilla's heart was quiet. She had already said her goodbyes in her grandmother's house, before stepping into the street to be guided by a procession of torchlight to a home she had never seen and to a man she barely knew. She had met him once, when she was 13. He had come with his own mother to the home of Agrippinilla's grandmother. There, the two matronly sisters, both daughters of Marcus Antonius and Octavia Thurina, sat together to negotiate a marriage, one that would strengthen their family's claim to a principate now balanced between two young boys, Caligula, a direct descendant of the divine Caesar Augustus, and Gemellus, a descendant only of Tiberius. As her grandmother and great-aunt spoke, Agrippinilla sat quietly, listening intently to every word. She could feel the eyes of her intended on her, sizing her up, inspecting her every movement and gesture, leering at her. But Agrippinilla kept her gaze fixed on her elders, refusing, at least inwardly, to be coerced into looking at the 27-year-old man she would one day be forced to marry. Now, 3 years later, as she approached the door to his home, Agrippinilla understood. The man she had once refused to look at would now decide her future. At the doorway, the bride took up a brush and anointed the lintel and doorpost with oil, then wrapped them in wool. Only then did her new husband sweep her into his arms and carry her across the threshold, careful not to stumble, lest an ill omen mark the beginning of their marriage. Once inside, he set her down upon a ceremonial wolf pelt spread across the atrium floor. While Agrippinilla sat in silence, gazing through her veil to make sense of her new surroundings, her husband returned to the doorway. There, he thanked his guests and then closed the door. Drawing her to her feet, her new husband removed the veil, revealing an atrium filled with household staff, attendants, and two prominent women who shared his auburn hair. He then offered Agrippinilla a cup of water, which she drank. Afterward, she took the torch bearing the flame carried from her grandmother's home and fed it into his hearth, stoking the fire. Now, Agrippinilla was officially the matron of his household. It was her duty to tend the hearth, manage the staff, organise the food supplies, oversee the household accounts, and, one day, educate any children they might have together. With these formalities concluded, Agrippinilla's auburn-haired husband dismissed the staff, gruffly instructing them to return to their duties. Then his hand closed around her wrist, small in his grasp, and without a word, he led her into the darkness of his sleeping cubicle. Once again, Enobarbus did not come home. He had not come home the night before either. In the 6 years since Agrippinilla married him, her husband spent about half the week elsewhere. If he wasn't at a party, one to which he never invited his wife, then he was likely with his mistress, a woman named Albusilla. Although Agrippinilla had never laid eyes on the woman, her beauty was well attested by the many men she had conquered and the wealth their affections had brought her. And Enobarbus was one of those men. The two women who domineered over Agrippinilla's life, since Enobarbus himself rarely bothered, both condemned Albusilla, dismissing her as nothing more than a vulgar prostitute. Yet when it came to Agrippinilla's husband, who paid for her services, they offered no criticism at all. Why would they? They were his older sisters. Both women were named Domitia Lepida. The elder, whom Agrippinilla referred to simply as Domitia, was around 40 years old. She had once been married to Haterius Agrippa, the same man who brought a charge of treason against a poet, leading to that poet's execution. But following the downfall of Lucius Aelius Sejanus, Haterius Agrippa was himself executed as one of his allies. Now, Domitia was married to a wealthy man named Crispus Passienus, who on the rare occasions he accompanied his wife on her daily visits to Agrippinilla's home, had always treated her kindly. The younger of the sisters, Lepida, was 37. She had 2 children. By her first husband, a daughter named Messalina, a girl about the same age as Agrippinilla's sister Drusilla, and by her second husband, a 10-year-old son named Faustus Cornelius Sulla. After the death of their mother, who died just before the downfall of Sejanus, both sisters took it upon themselves to oversee the household of their younger brother and his wife. In her own home, when the sisters arrived, Agrippinilla ceased being the mistress of the house. She was a symbol, nothing more. A grand name adorned with the most illustrious of bloodlines, Julian, Claudian, Agrippan. But she had failed thus far to conceive a child for their brother. And for that, the sisters looked down their noses at her, dismissing her as no more than a pauper princess. And yet, of Enobarbus's reputation, both sisters remained quiet. During her 6 years of marriage, Agrippinilla had heard the rumours. He was said to have plucked out the eye of an equestrian politician during a heated session in the Senate. He had once killed one of his own freedmen simply for failing to match him in a drinking game. And then there was the child, playing in the street along the Appian Way, ridden down by their brother, who couldn't be bothered to slow his pace or go around. These were the stories whispered about powerful men, men too well connected to be challenged, even by their own family. And after all that, he would still climb into Albasilla's bed, somehow made happy by her. In the quiet corners of her mind, Agrippinilla began to wonder. Even if Albasilla had once turned to prostitution for survival, she had made more than enough wealth to retire. Why then did she go on entertaining men like her husband? Perhaps Albasilla, scandalous though she was, had found a kind of power. Not the kind passed down from fathers or from emperors, but a kind of power denied to the women and girls of Rome's nobility. Agrippinilla couldn't yet name it, but it was worth remembering. The pounding on the door was abrupt. When the steward opened it, a cluster of soldiers stepped inside, boots heavy on the floor, their presence sharp and cold. A chill passed through Agrippinilla's body. She remembered the last time soldiers had come bursting into her home. That was the day they took her mother away. Suetonius Macro, the man Tiberius had promoted to praetorian prefect after the fall of Sejanus, immediately produced a warrant. Her husband, Gnaeus Domitius Enobarbus, was accused of conspiracy, of treason, and of incest. The charges, issued by Tiberius himself, centred on the courtesan Albasilla, who, according to the investigation, had become the point of contact between Enobarbus and his co-conspirators, Lucius Orontius and Vibius Marsus, both known intimates of Albasilla. So that no man might be seen speaking with another, each whispered his messages to her, trusting that the woman with access to them all would pass the words along. And the charge of incest was alleged with his sister, Lepida. As the soldiers marched her husband out the door, Agrippinilla stood beside her sisters-in-law, mouths agape. She fought the trembling rising in her body as memory overwhelmed her, the memory of what had happened, not just to Lucius alias Sejanus, but to those closely associated with him. His son, a young boy, ceremoniously made an adult, then stabbed. His daughter, a young and frightened girl, violated first, executed after. Both children were punished for the charge of treason against their father. And now, Agrippinilla's own husband stood accused of treason. If he was found guilty, what would that mean? For her,